Good afternoon. Today I will be talking about one of the most important parts of American history, and that is the American Revolutionary War. Without this war, the nation we live in today could be a very different place, still trying to uphold British customs and traditions. Now the war can be traced back to the French and Indian War, which took place between 1754 and 1763, which is why it's also known as the 7 Years' War. Now the war was fought over conflicting territorial claims between the French and the British in the Ohio River Valley. The British won the war, and this resulted in basically the expulsion of the French in North America. Now almost immediately after the war, the British enforced the Proclamation of 1763, which prohibited the Americans from moving west of the Appalachian Mountains. This, of course, enraged the Americans as they had just won a war and population was beginning to increase within the colonies, and the colonists needed more land to expand out to. In addition to this, the French and Indian War had put King George III and all of Great Britain deep into debt because of all the expenses that had been spent on soldiers, food, weapons, and those sorts of things. So, Great Britain began to enforce taxes without the consent of the colonists, which the colonists would then use to their advantage to bring up arms against the British by coining the phrase, taxation without representation. The first of these acts that were enforced by Great Britain were the Currency Acts of 1764, which prohibited the colonists from basically creating their own currency within the colonies. The next act would be the Stamp Act of 1765, which required the colonists to pay a tax on any printed documents, various licenses, and other goods. Now the colonists, of course, were greatly enraged because of this act and the taxes that they had to pay on these simple things that had never been taxed before. Next would come the Townshend Acts of 1767, which authorized Parliament to issue taxes on imports such as glass, lead, paint, paper, tea, and a number of other things. British soldiers would eventually have to be brought into Boston to prevent an uprising because of the anger that these acts were producing in the colonists. As a direct result of these acts, along would come the Boston Massacre, in which tension over the presence of British troops in Boston would lead to the first episode in the colonies that would result in loss of life between the colonists and the British. In this event, 4 Bostonians were killed when the British fired into an angry mob. After this would come the Boston Tea Party, which took place on December 16, 1773, in which the Sons of Liberty, who were led by Samuel Adams, planned to show Parliament how they felt about the Tea Act. They dressed as Indians, boarded the British ship named Dartmouth, which was docked in the Boston Harbor at the time, and dumped all the tea that could be found into the water, which resulted in the loss of hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tea. Of course, as a result of the Boston Tea Party, the British would enforce the Intolerable Acts, which would consist of several different acts. The first of these being the Boston Port Act, which closed the port of Boston until the Dutch East India Company had been repaid for the destroyed tea. Second was the Massachusetts Government Act, which put the government of Massachusetts almost entirely under British control. Third was the Administration of Justice Act, which allowed royal officials to be tried in Britain if the king felt it necessary for fair justice. Fourth would be one of the most famous acts, the Quartering Act, which ordered the colonists to provide lodging for British soldiers. And finally, there was the Quebec Act, which expanded British territory in Canada and guaranteed the free practice of Roman Catholicism. After the Intolerable Acts would come the First Continental Congress, in which 55 delegates representing 12 of the 13 colonies, excluding Georgia, would debate over what to do concerning the unfair treatment by the British. Now the colonists did attempt to petition against King George III with what was called the Olive Branch Petition, in which they basically told the king that they were being unfairly taxed without representation. The king did not listen and responded saying that they were in open and avowed rebellion. So, after the First Continental Congress, down the road came the battles of Lexington and Concord, in which the first shots of the American Revolution were fired. This would begin the American Revolution. As a result of the American Revolution, America would finally be recognized as an independent nation freed from Great Britain, and eventually down the road become one of the great superpowers of the world. Thank you.